Every year the lectionary gives us one version or another of what's called the Transfiguration. If you look up the word transfiguration, the definition you will probably find is a momentary transformation of a person into something having the aspect of the divine. Our lectionary for today also gives us a couple examples of a mountaintop experience. I think we're all familiar with that term, mountaintop experience. A mountaintop experience is a time when you feel so close to God and so strong in your faith that nothing can bring you down. A mountaintop experience is also an experience of God that exists for a limited time only. Many times that mountaintop experience is something you don't fully comprehend or appreciate until it's over. Today we have two examples of mountaintop experiences. One from the book of Exodus and one from the Gospel of Matthew. In Exodus we find Moses ascending the mountain and experiencing the glory of God, whatever that is, on that mountaintop. I'm sure Moses would have loved to stay on top of that mountain, on Mount Sinai with God. Moses' time with the Hebrews in the wilderness was anything but a picnic. The whining was constant. We're hungry. We're thirsty. We have no food. We have no meat. Why have you brought us out here to die, when at least if we stayed with our slave masters, we would have proper food and live? Worship of pagan gods from the Hebrews' past sprang up again constantly. And Aaron even helped the Hebrews in their worship of false gods. So while Moses was spending hours and days basking in the frightening and awesome presence of God, so close to God on the mountain that his own face glowed and radiated from the divine encounters, the Hebrews spent their time in the valley systematically rejecting everything that Moses was trying to teach them and every salvation that God was offering them. But Moses had a job, and that job that Moses had to do was to come down off the mountaintop. The reading from Matthew's Gospel continues the mountaintop theme and adds something more to it. It teaches us where God is meant to dwell. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up on the mountain to pray. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Dazzling, that's a great word. And suddenly any question about who Jesus is or where he comes from disappears in the piercing light of his divinity. Jesus is transfigured before his disciples' eyes into the Son of God that he has told them he is. And if that weren't enough, now Moses and Elijah, two of the greatest prophets from their history, show up, engulfed in their own glorious light. And then Peter makes what's considered to be a faux pas. Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. There are several interpretations as to what Peter was actually trying to say and to do. But I agree with something that was said in Bible study. I think Mike Medovich probably said it during Bible study. Peter just wasn't ready to come down from the mountain yet. A very human response to an incredibly grace-filled encounter with God. I think Peter just wanted to find a way to hold on to that moment, to contain Moses and Elijah and Jesus in dwellings, or tabernacles, as the Hebrews called them. I can relate to Peter's desire to hold on to God and to make a place on earth where God could dwell physically among us. And I think Peter's only mistake is that of geography. There is a place where God dwells with us and among us, but it's not in a tent or in a temple. It's not even in a church. On this side of creation, God dwells with and among us in our human hearts. But just like Moses and the disciples, Peter, James, and John, himself. God's work is done in the valley, not on the mountaintop. Moses came down to save the Hebrews mostly from themselves and to lead them out of the desert. Peter and James and John come down from the mountain to one day tell everyone what they experienced there. Jesus comes down from the mountain to begin his journey through the valley of the shadow of his own impending death in Jerusalem. And even when we stumble upon a glorious mountaintop experience in the presence of God, we too must come down. Mountaintop experiences are not the sole property of those who receive them. They are a special gift, but they don't just belong to me. Those are moments of grace, meant to sustain us, but they're also a gift to be shared with everyone. The mountaintop is where we encounter God in special ways, but down in the valley is where we make that mountaintop experience real for those who haven't been to the mountain yet. So when I come down from that mountaintop, I have a job to do. Testify. I must not be afraid to let others see me after that mountaintop experience. I must be courageous and resist the urge to put a veil over the glow that God has put on my face. The light on my face is not meant to be put under a bushel basket. It's meant to light the path to God for those who are still mucking through in the valley. I must not be afraid to tell others about my mountaintop experience. I must testify to it. When God has touched my heart in a special way, I must not be afraid to say, "Thanks be to God," out loud and proud. When I'm living in the valley, I have a job to do too. My job is to pray for those rare mountaintop experiences that create and sustain my faith. My job is to pray for Jesus Christ to come into my heart and to build a house there, a tabernacle, that place where God dwells within each of us. When necessary, my job is to seek out those whose faces are glowing and to bask in that glow. My job is to let that light into the tabernacle of my heart. On this side of creation, our heart is where Jesus Christ is meant to dwell. And when my heart feels dark and empty, I must not be afraid to say, "Where are you, God? I don't feel you. Please come and dwell in my heart." Sometimes our faces are glowing, and sometimes they're dark. Our job as Christians sent out by Jesus Christ is to come down from the mountaintop and to make sure that every face is filled with the light of Jesus Christ and every heart becomes his dwelling place. The good news today is that in just a few minutes we are privileged to have both a mountaintop experience and a mini transfiguration in our very midst. Today we will baptize Camden Bethany Kotsky. And as we do so, we get to experience an incredible grace-filled moment as the water of baptism washes her clean and transfigures her in our midst into a newly formed member of the body of Christ.